Delgado Cool. Thank you very much for hosting us. We feel at home. It is an extraordinary space, but you are wrong. The best that Cuba has is its people. And for all Cubans, my affection. To the President of the High Court of the Republic of Cuba, but I would like to salute all the general attorneys present here from Argentina, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Angola, Ecuador, Panama, Portugal, and the Vice General Attorneys of the Republic of China, who was in Venezuela with us just a couple of days ago. But I wanted to commend Dr. Juan Escalona, especially to him. When I started as General Attorney, and I was working in this area, I would like to say from there I started learning from you, and I would like to show my appreciation and affection for you. When Latin Americans hear conversations about migration, we think about people that voluntarily and on their own decide to leave their countries on their belief that they will have more work opportunities and a better quality of life in other countries. Unfortunately, this life philosophy is more complicated than what it seems. For example, in some countries around the world that are under important social and humanitarian crises and even armed struggles, many people are forced to leave their homes because of survival-related reasons. For them, trying is better than being enslaved or tortured. My country, Venezuela, historically has received great waves of migrants from different reasons, from different countries, always with open doors and providing all legal facilities in order for them to settle and develop. An example of that is the great quantity of Europeans from Spain, Italy, and Portugal that were received in the mid-20th century as a result of the Second World War. They sought refuge and a new place for a new beginning, away from the devastation of that armed conflict. There are about 8 million Europeans settled in the Venezuelan society between 1948 and 1961. We were barely 5 million inhabitants at that moment. It contributed to the cultural syncretism that has somehow provided for the national identity since the times of the conquest. Between the 1960 and 1970, there was an important Latin American migration, first from Colombia, whose nationals ran away from poverty and the armed conflict in that country, which is now in a peace process that has been hosted by Cuba. And also people from Peru, Chile, and Ecuador migrated to Venezuela in the 1960s. 360,000 Spaniards live in Venezuela, from Portugal about 150,000, 500,000 from China and from the Arab countries. About 4 million Venezuelans have an Italian forefather or ancestor, and also Venezuela has the second largest Spanish community in South America, the third Italian community, and the second Portuguese community, second to Brazil only. From the legal point of view, since May 20th, 2004, Venezuela enacted the law of immigration and foreigners that replaced the former of 1936. This law that regulates the entering and permanence of foreigners in Venezuela allows for two categories, migrants and non-migrants, but all of them are guaranteed the respect to their human rights. We have been careful regulating this in a fashion that the human rights of all these persons are fully guaranteed. But beyond that, there are realities in the world that should be analyzed in depth, since they constitute today a matter of great importance, both because of its causes and its severe consequences. It is the forced migrants, those that end up being refugees, and those are the ones I want to talk about today. These are the persons that are persecuted or chased in their countries because of their beliefs, race, armed conflict, natural disasters, and they are forced to leave their countries and venture illegally into others in order to safeguard their lives and physical integrity. For them, protections are based mostly in ensuring the admission into a country that acknowledges their right as refugees, the respect to their human rights, and the principles of non-return, which means that they are not to be sent back to their countries of origin. The High Commissioner of the United Nations for the Refugees, ACNUR, possesses three ways to resolve the problems of the refugees: voluntary repatriation, meaning that they return to their home countries accompanied by ACNUR; the resettlement in a third country different from the one that they found refuge at, or the local integration. Unfortunately, we have witnessed a historical moment when the number of refugees around the world has risen to never seen numbers, and this is due to the terrible conflicts that are currently ongoing in different countries around the world. Maybe the case that have received most of the media coverage and the one that has caused more displacements is the one in Syria starting in the year 2011. But it's not the purpose of this presentation to deepen into the real end of this international crusade, since I will only tackle the topic of refugees from the traumatic point of view, from the traumatic process that means to leave the homeland, leave the end, final destination, and all the difficulties and human rights violations that it entails. There are about 4 million persons that are migrants, not just in Syria, but in other Middle Eastern countries. They seek refuge in neighboring countries, and they risk their lives to reach Europe through very fragile means of transportation, especially modified to transport persons. A critical humanitarian situation that has become more and more severe, and especially so in the year 2015 because of the uncontrolled flow of migrants requesting asylum and many migrants under vulnerable conditions who jointly share the same irregular paths of displacement towards the European Union countries. Until November 21st, 2015, about 1,600,000 persons entered Europe, of which over 900,000 requested political asylum. On the other hand, last year alone, over 1.3 thousand persons died in the attempt. It is the biggest humanitarian crisis and migratory crisis in Europe after the second WW, to such extent that the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Refugees acknowledged that Europe is confronting one of the biggest waves of migrants in decades, and emphasized that it is a refugee crisis and not a migratory phenomenon. The majority of the population movements are characterized by a forced movement of people because of armed conflicts, persecution, poverty, and the illicit immigrants trafficking that transfer them in degrading and dangerous conditions. ACNUR projections state that the number of migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea will reach 400,000 by the year 2015, and in the year 16 it would reach 450,000 more. So in 2 years' time, at least over 850,000 persons would cross the Mediterranean Sea to seek refuge in the EU, not mentioning those that attempt to cross by land through Turkey. It can be said that the refugee crisis has revealed the dark side of humankind and the contrast that exists between human solidarity, the most basic human solidarity, and the insensitive and cold calculations of some rulers. Through mass media and the social network, we have seen footage and images and known the histories of men, women, and children running away from the horrors of war, hunger, and devastation just to find death in the ocean or in the flatbeds or the containers of trucks, to face barbed wire, detention camps, the police, which is something that has touched our fiber, our sensitivities, because they are deported in a forced fashion. This, I would say, that has shaken millions of persons and has placed before us to confront the duty of solving these situations. We first of all feel obliged to provide answers and understand the origins of this crisis. The refugees run away from the countries that have been submitted to civil wars. From our point of view, there are no differences between refugees and migrants. Both flee civil wars and mainly the violations of human rights. Many others run away from hunger and devastations caused by exploitation. In the majority of the cases, is a combination of all these factors. The response now and in the past has been the building of walls and ever more sophisticated systems in order to prevent the entry of the hunger and the fearful. The great powers of the West are proud to mention the destruction of the Berlin Wall while building other walls in Ceuta, Libya, Bulgaria, Hungary. And I have to say that one candidate for the presidency in the United States proposes to build a wall between Mexico and the U.S. Great quantities of money are also spent in financing the detention camps in extra-community countries. Maybe this policy of security is one that forces hundreds of thousands of refugees and immigrants to get into the hands of the mobs in order to try to enter those countries through illegal routes. It is another problem. It has become a very lucrative business. According to estimates, in the case of Europe, immigrants have paid about €1 billion per year in the last 15 years to end the journey in order to pay for those journeys. So many means demonize the mobs as being the only cause of the problem. They are indeed criminal bands with no respect for human life and are only interested in getting profits. However, the persons traffickers do not create the refugees or push migrants into the developed countries. They simply benefit themselves from the existing migratory movement. In face of this terrible reality, we heard comments like the one expressed by David Cameron, Prime Minister of Britain. He just said last year, he said that Search and rescue operations should be halted or ended, fearing a cold effect that would incite migrants to undertake the risk of crossing the Mediterranean Ocean. And in the end, they did. The Mare Nostrum operation in Italy was substituted by Triton operation, coordinated by the Agency for the Safety of Outer Borders, that is composed by Coast Guards authorities. It doesn't mean that they are actually against migration. Migrant workers are very useful from the corporate point of view. They are a source of highly qualified workers. They don't imply cost of training and operation, but rather a very cheap labor force that can be exploited by a given sector of economic power, bypassing law, used to also lower the wages of the other workers. They are also the culprits of the cost in public services, lack of housing and insecurity, among others. And to that, you should add the fact that European governments suffer the pressures of the xenophobic organizations with their racist, nationalist, and anti-immigrant claims. These opinions do not reflect, however, the thinking of the majority. What we have seen during the last days is totally opposed to those expressions. A torrent of solidarity and humanitarian aid to the migrants in Greece during summer, tourists and the inhabitants of the different islands took care of the refugees that tried to cross from Turkey, and in Serbia, persons have gone out to tell their own stories and help migrants in Belgrade and other cities. Even in Hungary, several persons have helped them in the main train stations in Budapest, and hundreds and thousands of persons have demonstrated against the anti-migrant policies. In Germany and Austria, posters supporting migrants have been present. Over 30,000 persons demonstrations in solidarity, willing to provide humanitarian aid, is something that was witnessed as well. The crisis of migrants has become a political matter of the great order. We saw impressive movements of migrants in different media outlets, and it's obvious that there is a direct reaction to the published images, to the images published in the mass media. You may recall that image that went viral of the child on the shores of Turkey, and about 71 persons who died on the back of a truck. In face of this, an important solution is to open risk-free routes to places that would ensure their security. It would mean that the persons can reunite with their relatives and provide visas so that they cannot use their lifetime savings for that, or witness the prospects of dying at sea or being confined to such a heinous means of transportation. All countries are to be committed to trial the bands of traffickers that exploit refugees and the migrants, and who, in consequence, place monetary interests above the security and safety of these persons. Such commitment should be broadened to the resettlement of all these refugees, especially all those needed. Resettlement is an essential solution for the majority of the refugees and the ones that are in the more vulnerable conditions, those that are survivors of torture. And so, you should not return back to their countries, the persons that run away from situations of war, and whether they have documents or not. Forcing them back is not a good solution. Building walls is not a good solution. It only forces them to take ever more dangerous routes. According to ACNUR, 19.5 million persons all across the world have been obliged to seek refuge outside their countries. Governments have the obligation to help. However, the richest countries are still resist themselves in terms of providing assistance. It means that this matter is alien to them. In consequence, hidden behind their borders, close and fearful of being flooded, they allow that other poorer countries, mainly the Middle East, Africa, and the South of Asia, host an incredible 85% of the persons that are currently refugees, also ignoring the majority of humanitarian aid requests. They abandon the UN agencies that no longer can provide full attention to many of these refugees. The governments should also stop blaming the refugees and migrants because of their economic and social problems. I wanted to highlight the Latin American initiative and that of the Caribbean for the treatment of refugees. We host this in an instrument subscribed in the year 1984 in the city of Cartagena, where the Central American countries and Mexico signed a declaration based on the Refugees Convention, but adjusted to the Latin American reality and the situation that the continent faced at the moment. It is the most prominent instrument in the region on refugees since it updates the situation for Latin America and proposes new approaches. But in 1994, the San Jose Statement on Refugees and Displaced Persons centered in the internal displacements, while the humanitarian infrastructure had not yet been established. In the year 2004, the Plan of Action of Mexico for the Protection of Refugees in Latin America represented an excellent example of how to foster and sustain regional solidarity and an effective cooperation beyond the language of a statement, and building for the first time a strategic framework for the protection and solution of the refugee situations. In the year 2014, the Latin American and Caribbean governments met in Brasilia in the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Cartagena Declaration. In that occasion, all the attending countries, among which Cuba and Venezuela are included, and many of those present here today, adopted by consensus the Declaration and Plan of Action of Brazil, agreeing to work together in maintaining the standards for protection and try to have the highest standards as possible in that area, with the provision of innovative solutions for the matter, and also to put an end to the difficult situation that are confronted by persons no living in their homelands in the region. It maintained the level of aspirations in providing a new legal framework for the next decade in the region, acknowledging the new realities confronted by Latin America and the Caribbean, which are the ones that force people to leave and seek protection. This document states the willingness of Latin America and the Caribbean to humanly approach the needs of the most vulnerable, as well as the values and contributions of the dynamics that exist in society.
toda esta
in
región.
all this area and in
Como
all this
aspectos
region.
resaltantes de
As
esta
an
convención
aspect to be
se
highlighted,
destaca el compromiso de
we
mejorar
have the commitment
los procedimientos de
of
determinación de la
improving
condición
the
de refugiado
procedures for
y
the
la
determination
gestión
of
de
the
todos
condition
los
as
temas
refugees
relacionados
and the
con
management
el
of all
derecho
the
a
actions
solicitar y
pertaining
recibir asilo
the
por
right
medio
to
de un
request
programa,
asylum
asilo de
through a
calidad,
program that is
que
called
incorpora
Asylum Equality,
altos estándares de protección,
joining high
incluidos
standards of
aquellos
protection,
desarrollados
including
por el
those
sistema
developed
interamericano.
by the Inter-American
Asimismo,
System.
se reconoce
Likewise,
que las
it
zonas
is
de frontera
acknowledged
son
that the
complejas
border
y necesitan
areas
ser
are
preservadas
complex
como
and
espacios
must
de
be
seguridad y
protected
protección
and
para todas las
preserved
personas
as areas of protection
nacionales
for
y extranjeras.
persons both from the
Por
country
ello,
of origin
se
and
acoge la
abroad.
propuesta de establecer el programa de fronteras solidarias y
This is
seguras
why the
para
program
el
for establishment
abordaje
of
de
safe
las necesidades de personas que
secure
residen,
borders
transitan
is
o
established
retornan
for
a
the
áreas
persons that
fronterizas
live,
como parte de
go
movimientos
through
migratorios,
or return to the
incluidas
border
las personas con
areas,
necesidades de protección
including those that
internacional.
require international
Se
protection.
expresa además la
It also
voluntad
expresses the
y
willingness
capacidad de la
and the
región para
ability of
seguir
the region
ofreciendo
to continue to
soluciones
provide
innovadoras
solutions in an
para las
innovative
personas
fashion
refugiadas,
for the persons
desplazadas y
that are
apátridas,
refugees,
apoyando a los
displaced,
países
or
de la
living
región
in
que
land
reciben
different from their own,
altos números de refugiados
especially for the
y
countries in the region that
demostrando
receive
solidaridad
big numbers of
con las
refugees
crisis
and demonstrating
humanitarias
solidarity
internacionales.
with the humanitarian
Finalmente,
crisis. Finally,
al abordar esta
in
materia
addressing
debemos
this
tener presente
issue, we
que
have to
algunas de las
bear
personas
in
que
mind
han
that
huido de su
some of
país,
the persons that have fled
su
their
vida corre
countries
peligro,
or whose lives are
su
in
integridad
danger,
física está
their
en peligro,
physical
su libertad
integrity
ha
is
sido
in danger,
amenazada
their
por
freedom
diversas
has been
circunstancias,
threatened because of different
aspiran y
circumstances.
esperan
They
la
aspire
solidaridad de todos.
and expect
Es por
the
ello
solidarity of all.
que desde
This is
nuestras
why
competencias debemos
from our
aproximarnos
competence,
al refugiado,
we should
más
approach
allá de
the
las
refugee
fórmulas legales
beyond the
que le
legal
permitan o no
formulas
cruzar una
that may
frontera,
allow him or her to
conscientes del
cross a
origen del
border
problema
and aware
y
of
de
the
todo
origin
el
of the
proceso
problem
emocional
and
y
all the
psicológico
emotional and
que los llevó a
psychological
dejar
process
su
that
país,
forced them to leave their
sus
countries,
costumbres, sus afectos,
their
sus
customs,
creencias,
their
y
affections,
su
their
modo de
beliefs,
vida,
and their ways of
para
life,
iniciar una
to
aventura
start a
en
venture,
otro país que
an
les es
adventure in
ajeno,
another
sin
country,
ni
a country
siquiera saber
alien
si
to
será
them,
aceptado.
even without
Más
knowing
allá
if
del
they will
trámite
be
legal que
accepted
debe
or not.
cumplirse y verificarse en cada caso,
Beyond the legal
busquemos
procedures,
humanizar el trato
we
al
should
refugiado,
humanize the treatment to
no verlo
the
como una
refugee,
carga o
not
como
to see
desprecio,
as a burden,
sino como un ser
but
humano
as a
atravesando
human being
circunstancias excepcionales
under
que no merece
exceptional
que una
circumstances
frontera
that
le
does not
dificulte
deserve that a
aún
border
más su
will
situación,
make
sino
his
que por el
situation
contrario
more
le
difficult,
brinde un trato
but
humano
provide
y
a
cercano
humane
mientras se le
and
gestiona
close
la respuesta
treatment
correspondiente.
while the relevant response is provided to them. This is our message from Venezuela. Thank you very much.